And today we are going to talk about 7 Neo Geo games that you should have in your collection on OG Xbox. What it is, welcome back to the channel. I'm Neo Ness, and if it's your first time here on the channel, this channel talks about all things Neo Geo and video games just holistically as well, but we specialize mainly on Neo Geo here. But we're branching out a little bit. We need to have a broader conversation. Yeah, everybody's talking about Xbox right now, and this actually is one of my favorite consoles. I collect a lot of Xbox games. Heck, I was just out this past weekend collecting a bunch of games on 360 OG Xbox, just picking up a couple of titles that I needed for the collection. So it's definitely an awesome console to collect for. It doesn't get the love that it should, but hey, it is what it is. I've been collecting OG Xbox, or just Xbox in general, for many years now. My collection has grown, and even from the time that you see in my original game room video, as you can see, the background's pretty empty. I'm in the process of moving, so if you haven't seen the video of me tearing down the game room, it's still an ongoing process. So our first game that we're going to talk about is King of Fighters 2002 and 2003. So in this particular version for Xbox, we were doubled up with 2 of the King of Fighters games, actually the 9th and 10th installment on Xbox. Now this was not an exclusive, as we saw this on PlayStation 2 as well, but this game has some really great fighting. It's probably amongst Neo Geo collectors, not the 2 top favorites within the entire series. However, this game definitely has some really good value in terms of gameplay. In terms of sprite animations, etc., a few of the characters were redrawn from previous King of Fighters, as the entire roster in this game consists of not only King of Fighters of old, but other SNK related games that are through other portions of the Neo Geo library, like Metal Slug, Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, etc. So definitely a game to have in the collection if you haven't played it. If you're a fan of fighting games, I definitely recommend this game. In terms of pricing, you can generally find this game for around 20 to 30 bucks, so it's nothing too crazy. It's not rare or uncommon. You can definitely find this at a local convention, a retro video game store, so check it out. And of course, if you're not up for the physical version, you can also find this on the ACA digital version on Xbox as well, so you can download pretty much all of the video games from the Neo Geo library for around $7.99. Our next game is King of Fighters Maximum Impact. Now, this particular game is also not an Xbox exclusive, as this one can be found on PlayStation 2 as well. This was kind of a spin-off to the King of Fighters, and it was more in terms different elements of Fatal Fury and the Art of Fighting series. And this was the first 3D made SNK game since the early 1990s Fatal Fury game Wild Ambition. Now, while this game was, I mean, if you're looking for it in your collection, by all means, it's definitely not the best KOF ever out there. 3D graphics are really dated here. The character designs are a little slow and clunky, but overall, if you're looking for something to build up your Xbox collection in terms of fighting games, this is one that you can get as well. And this game can be found generally just on PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. And finally, our last King of Fighters game on this list, King of Fighters Neowave. Now, Neowave is a 2D fighting game produced by SNK Playmore, and this was actually a coin-operated arcade game that was for Sammy's The Atomic Wave. So the Atomic Wave hardware was a custom arcade system board and cabinet from Sammy Corporation, and it's based on Sega Dreamcast's consoles. And you'll see a few of SNK Playmore's games on Thomas Wave. Maybe we'll talk about that in another video. Games like Metal Slug 6 was another one from SNK that made it to a Thomas Wave. Unfortunately, it didn't make it to Xbox. I would have loved to have seen Metal Slug 6 come to Xbox, but we just didn't get to see it. So Definitely a cool little game to have there. Kind of gives me the Capcom versus SNK 2 vibe, where we have the 3D background and then we've got the sprite animation on top. Actually, out of the King of Fighters games on this list, this is actually going to be the most expensive. This generally runs around 40 to 45 bucks. So if you do happen to come across this in your searches when you're out there in the wild looking for OG Xbox games, definitely add this one to your list because it's pretty decent. Next up, one of my favorite games on Neo Geo in any form or fashion, Metal Slug 3. This game is the run and gun shooter side scroller that we know and love, and this is what actually really sparked for the Neo Geo console and arcade system, and we actually got to see this come to Xbox in later years. So this particular game has been ported literally to almost every single console that you can think of out there: PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, Windows, iOS. This game is super fun, and this is actually probably one of my favorite Metal Slug games out of the entire series from 1 to 6. Metal Slug 3 is my favorite. The mechanics are smooth, the sprite animations are good, the gameplay keeps you hooked in and engaged. This is definitely a game, if you don't want to spend thousands of dollars purchasing it on the original Neo Geo hardware, you can roughly find Metal Slug 3 for 15 to 25 bucks on OG Xbox. So definitely cool there. And of course, if you want to download this virtually, you can do this on Xbox as well. I think it's generally running about $7.99 at the time of this video. Staying with the trend, Metal Slug 4 and 5. Yes, we are tacked on with the Metal Slugs. As you can see, Metal Slug 4 and 5 have very similar gameplay and continue on from Metal Slug 3. This was actually technically the last Metal Slug that we saw on Neo Geo hardware. So we saw it on the home console for Neo Geo, and we saw it in the MVS format, and of course we saw ports for this on PlayStation and Xbox. Samurai Showdown 5. This is the 8th game in SNK's Samurai Showdown series of fighting games. This was a great samurai slashing fighting game on the Neo Geo console and arcade, and we got to see this ported across numerous consoles in the earlier versions of Samurai Showdown. For many of you that may collect retro video games, Samurai Showdown 1 and 2, we generally saw those back in the day of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and as time went on, we saw Samurai Showdown 3 that made it to PlayStation 1, and now we have Samurai Showdown 5 that made it to Xbox, and this is a only on Xbox version, meaning that the Samurai Showdown 5 that we see here did not make it to the US market for PlayStation 2. However, it was made in Japan on PlayStation 2. So pretty cool. We got a couple exclusives from an Xbox perspective there. And then lastly on this list, this game is so awesome. I remember the first time that I played this in the arcade, SVC Chaos, or SNK versus Capcom Chaos, which is a sequel to Capcom versus SNK 2. This was actually the third installment. While Capcom did the first two, Capcom versus SNKs, SNK got the rights to do the third installment of this game. Now, while it's not as smooth and polished as Capcom versus SNK 2, this is definitely a game to have in the collection. However, I must have one side note. This is one of the very few games that you're going to need some original hardware. Backwards compatibility for this particular game just isn't on the list. It was such a heartbreak because when I found this game originally on original Xbox for physical, I popped this into my Xbox 360 and it didn't work. It was so dreadful. Yes, if you have an original Xbox, this is going to be one of those few games that you're going to need to have the original hardware to play it on. and it is a great game. It's going to have some awesome fighters in there. The fighters from King of Fighters are in there, and we're going to have some Capcom exclusives. The Great Way for Terry versus Ken, Akuma versus whoever. Great, awesome game. And this game actually came out on the original hardware for Neo Geo. So yeah, even in the early 2000s, we were still seeing the 1990 Neo Geo console still pumping out exclusives that we saw on original Xbox and PlayStation, and this was one of them. Now, in terms of playability between the original hardware and the Xbox was actually a very good port of this game. It is almost identical to the original port on the Neo Geo, which is awesome. So if you're playing this game, this is definitely one to have. It can be found, of course, on OG Xbox. This game is not an exclusive for the US, so it is only on OG Xbox. And if you wanted to play this on PlayStation 2, you're going to have to pick up a Japanese version for this game. And my honorable mention on this list, while it is not an SNK made produced game, it definitely has SNK games, and we've already talked about this game a couple of times, and that is Capcom vs. SNK 2, Mark of the Millennium 2001. This is probably in my top 5 favorite fighting games of all time. I played this game so much, my fingers were sore. Played this in the arcade, PlayStation 2, and I actually have this version on virtually every single console. I have it for Dreamcast, I have it for PlayStation 2, I have it for Xbox, and I have it for GameCube. So this is definitely a game, whether you're collecting for any of those consoles, is definitely one to have in the collection, and it has a very high cult following in terms of competitive fighting games. Some of these games do too. I would probably say in the King of Fighters, it's on the newer version for King of Fighters 15, but from a Evo and fighting game perspective, Capcom vs. SNK 2 is still a heavy hitter and still played today. So, do you have these 7 or 8 games in your collection on OG Xbox? Do you purchase these digitally, or are you playing these on other consoles in the Japanese version, or if they came over in the US for PlayStation 2, do you have them there? Drop comments down below, let me know, and as always, collect and play the way that you want to collect and play your games, and we'll check you next time. Peace.